So today we're going to talk in the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, about why markets move. And when you understand the why, then the how becomes easier. So a lot of what we're doing with the software, the Flux software, the Ninjatrader indicators, is developing leading indications of movement of price. Okay, so as opposed to lagging indicators that tell you what just happened, and all of you watching this right now have purchased the software, so you've gotten a really good taste of how that works. But the underlying causality, the why of it all, eludes many of you, and it did for me for a number of years. And as an engineer, as good as I could get to be anyway, I always try to understand the why, the how. The how is another great question. How does it work? Why does it work that way? What are the underlying mechanics behind the markets and how they move? And so most of what we were told growing up in our junior trader years relied upon the concepts of fear versus greed. So the market was continually moving between two boundaries. On the one side you had fear, and on the other side you had greed. And like a game of Pong from the 80s, that ball was constantly moving back and forth between fear and greed. But that wasn't enough for me. And I want to talk today about the underlying factors behind fear and greed, and the cycles of life that move us between good moods and bad moods, between anxiety and elation, between paranoia and risk. So when we were developing the PowerPoint presentations for the Flux software, many of you came across and started to send us wonderful information. And we came across secondary information in relation to that. And one of the charts that really caught my eye and my attention, and you've seen this in my presentations numerous times, was the Sunspot tracking graph in relation to the United States economy. And this idea that there was something external to the markets that was causing people to behave a certain way. So we had the number of sunspots on our sun in our nice little solar system moving up and down in this sinusoidal wave pattern, a sine wave, a series of peaks and valleys. And I want you to key in on this signature. Pretend we're a bunch of Indiana Jones students and we're learning about Egyptian hieroglyphics. Pretend that we see this symbol everywhere, this snake-like symbol moving up and down. Okay, I want you to key in on that, because this is going to be the fingerprint of the markets, the fingerprint of market life, as it were. Okay, so what we take away from this chart is that when the sunspot cycle is at an all-time high, the market achieves a bubble and crashes. And sometimes the exact opposite occurs in a valley. Sometimes the cycle will flip. So in all of these years, but 1933-34, the recession or depression occurs at the peak of solar spot activity before the drop on the other side. Let me show you what that looks like close up. In essence, we have this giant yellow ball in the sky. And that giant yellow ball in the sky has these wonderful black spots. When you look at them from far away, it looks like a teenager. Has these little pimples and dimples on it. And scientists back on Earth look out from their telescopes and they count the number of spots. So here's the telescope. And they look and they're constantly graphing week to week, month to month, the number of spots that are there. And what the economists found was as the sunspots were hitting a crescendo and starting to curve down, the economy would tank right here. Now, Carol, that seems pretty odd. Dennis, Gary, that seems a little weird to me. We're veering very close into hippy-dippy, tree-hugging, crystal-rubbing Californian territory here. You could probably include Portland in there now. They're even weirder. But it raises this question. What do these black spots have to do with the S&P 500? What do these black spots have to do with crude or gold futures? What do these black spots have to do with intraday movements? And that's where things got pretty interesting for me. So as a why junkie, as a how junkie, this was something of consequence to me. And so I started to research as much as I could about this phenomenon. And if we look at some images up close, you'll find that when you look at the sunspots up close, there's amazing things taking place. Horrific things are taking place. And here's a picture that really I want you to key in on. When we see a sunspot, we have these coronal ejections. The sun essentially sneezes, but it's a good long sneeze. And just like a sneeze, it releases particles. Right? You ever see those high-speed sneeze photo? This is pretty disgusting right here, right? But when this guy sneezes, Derek, you see all those particles that go flying out? Yeah, sun snot is a great way to say it. But when the sun does it, it releases charged particles. It releases charged particles towards us. And basically, it's omnidirectional. Depending on where the spots are, the radiation is being released all over. Now this, again, what does this have to do with trading? Why do these magnetic field changes have anything to do with the markets? Why do these sunspots have anything to do with the markets? Well, that's what I wanted to find out. That's what I wanted to see, because this is a fairly damning chart. And then from the webinar, you guys remember that I went back and I started to chart where the global conflicts of the world were taking place. And at the top of this sunspot cycle, we had the Chinese Civil War. At the top of this sunspot cycle, Germany invaded Poland. At the top of this sunspot cycle in 1947, 48, 49, 50, we had the Korean War and the Israeli War of Independence. Then we had the Vietnamese War at the top of this spot cycle. All these dates are taken from Wikipedia, so if there's an error here, please let me know. The top of this sunspot cycle, we have the bloodiest battle in the Vietnamese conflict, the Tet Offensive. 50,000 people, I believe, were killed in that one battle. Russia invades Czechoslovakia. Libyan civil war puts Gaddafi in power, the bloodiest Middle Eastern battle to date at that point in that cycle. Then on the top of the next sunspot cycle, more sun snot hits us, but then it starts to fade away. It's not as great, and we have Russia invading Afghanistan. We have the Iran-Iraq War, which is now the bloodiest battle in Middle Eastern history. Next sunspot cycle, the Rwandan invasion, the bodies floating down those rivers in Africa from the genocide that took place there. The Bosnian Civil War with thousands, tens upon thousands of people being slaughtered in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Iraq invades Kuwait. Remember when you-know-who had you-know-whats of steel and just rolled in and took a country over? And our response was right on time with Operation Iraqi Freedom. So, Derek, this seemed to be, for me, one of the first times in my trading and tool development career that I could point to a cause-effect relationship in human behavior and history, where we could identify a potential correlative cause and predict the outcome or the effect. Chris had a wonderful question. He said, were there any positive events at the bottoms of the dips? Chris, it's easier to track our horrific events than it is to track our wonderful events. We seem to be better at the former and worse at the latter. But that would be an interesting study to take place. Are there good things happening at the bottoms? Well, one of the things that I started to do, I think the study has its own credence in and of itself. I don't think it needs any more verification or validation or affirmation. Between the two different studies, it's relatively undeniable what's taking place. Derek wants us to know that Jennifer Lopez gave a concert in 2006, so that was good news. There you go, Chris. Study verified. So, one of the things that really struck me was this quote. And this haunts me. To this day, it haunts me. This is J.P. Morgan. And for those of you that don't know who J.P. Morgan is, welcome to civilization. First of all, congratulations upon exiting your cave. But J.P. Morgan is part of the upper echelon of old money. These juggernauts of industry. Back in the early part of the 20th century, you have the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, this very short list of names of people who are insanely wealthy. And the one quote you don't expect to hear is this one. Millionaires don't use astrology. Billionaires do. This is before satellites. This is before the Weather Channel. This is before the internet. This is before anything really of consequence. This was an era of Einstein. This was the era of WD Gann. This was the era of Ralph Elliott. This is the era of Richard Wyckoff. Discoveries are being made. The Industrial Revolution is in full force. And in the midst of that, you have this quote, which is haunting, because here's the second piece of validation, verification, affirmation, word, whatever word you want to use, of a connection between a cause and effect relationship. Someone who has immense financial power and acumen is stating very clearly, listen, I've identified a cause that has a predictable effect. And then Gann himself talks about this in his courses, in his writings, and actually says after the end of his career, I have discovered the law of vibration determines price points and movements. The working out of my law of vibration determines the cause and predicts the effect long before Wall Street is aware. Okay, the question is asked, so Michael, increased electromagnetic radiation is responsible for the ills of the world. It makes world leaders make bad decisions, ? I would posit the opposite. David, let's take what you just said and let's rephrase it. Remember Jeopardy? Ooh, you didn't phrase it in the form of a question. Let's rephrase what you just said, and I want to give you my theory. Here's my theory. We understand that people are affected by their surroundings. Okay? So think of it this way. Dave, if I put you in a cold room, and I started to turn the temperature down, you don't have a jacket, you don't have a sweater, what kinds of decisions are you going to start to make? Okay, this is the Michael's cold room example. If I put you in a cold room, and it starts to get colder and colder, right around the freezing mark, maybe sub-freezing, are you going to make healthy, competent decisions? If I gave you standard academic tests? No, that's right. Your external conditions, your environment is affecting your physiology and psychology. Okay, so in relation to the cycles that we're looking at here now, the question of whether or not our leaders make bad decisions, I think, can be inverted. I think we can ask the question a different way. And here's the question I've been asking. And let's see if it makes more sense the way I say it. Maybe, maybe not. Do world leaders take advantage of our environmental conditions to achieve their ends of power and wealth? Do world leaders take advantage of our environmental conditions to achieve the ends of power, growth, and wealth? Okay? So, if I'm Goldman Sachs, where am I going to start to build a position in my economy? Right here. People are starting to do what? I feel great. I feel good. Na, 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 na. What happens when people start to feel great? They spend. And then they spend. And then what happens? They get a raise. And then when they get a raise, Dave, what do? They buy a house. And then their friend buys a house. And then they sell that house, or they get a second mortgage and what? Build a pool. But what does Goldman know, Carol, right about here? What does Goldman know right about here in the cycle? Coming to the end. Things are going to start to get ugly. The room is about to get cold. The temperature is about to go down. And so Goldman, at this point, again, this is what I believe. Goldman at this point does what? Quietly shorts the market. So in the last cycle, Goldman was selling mortgages. They were building mortgage derivative funds. They were packaging mortgages together like stocks. Subprime mortgages were being stuffed into the portfolios as fast as they could get them. And the entire time, they had created a new market to short the housing market, to short the bond market. So they were pumping up the one side and betting against it on the other side. Okay, so let's talk about what happens on the other side of the curve. Dave, when people have no more money and you still need to make money and they're not going to give it to you, how do you get it from them? When people have no more money and you need to continue to make money, they're not going to spend it on houses and boats and fur coats and Rolex watches and jet skis. And everybody starts to pucker up and pull it in, but you still need to make money on this side. Chris said you steal it. I say you start a war. What do we know about the tops of cycles, Carol? People are agitated. People are fearful. People are unreasonably paranoid. People are freaking out. They're panicking. They're easily persuaded to violence. And so then we start to hear things like weapons of mass destruction. We're going to get them. We're going to get them. Dead or alive. Alive or dead or somewhere in between. They got whole trainloads of stuff. They're all over the place. Dead or alive. And what does Goldman start to invest in? Halliburton. Did I spell that correctly? Raytheon. Northrop Grumman. Pretty sure I spelled all these wrong. And then the war machine starts. Where does the money from the war machine come from, David? Taxes. The second generation, the third generation out. Well, we need to raise taxes. You can't send our soldiers into the field ill-equipped. How are we going to build $40,000 bathrooms in Kuwait? How are we going to build garages in Afghanistan with no doors if we don't have more taxes? Right? Again, and I'm sure I spelled these wrong. I'm just going by the memory. So this was the first time that I started to suspect and really key in on, and it's a dark place to go to. People in power take advantage of our weakness in relation to to our environments. People in power take advantage of our weaknesses in relation to our environments. So how many of you are married? How many of you have a spouse and can think back to and remember when you were first married and you were still feeling out each other? And you had a phone call from your buddies from school or from work. They were going to go on a ski trip. They were going to go to Vegas for the weekend. And when your wife came home, you're watching her for signs of a good mood. Because if she comes home and talks about Susan in accounting and how she's just a piece of you-know-what, and if that girl blah 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 and she did this today and I just can't stand her, you're not asking her then to go to Vegas. What are you waiting for? The phone rings. It's her best friend Jenny across the street and their favorite blah blah blah, and that's such great news, and did you hear this person, and oh, that's wonderful. Psst, sweetheart, I don't mean to interrupt. Can I go to Vegas with the boys this weekend? Chuck's feeling real sad and we want to go cheer him up. Oh, sure, yeah, go. No, everything's great. We do it in our daily lives. You ask your boss for a raise when he's in a good mood. You don't wait till when his dog died to tell him why you deserve 10% more than you did yesterday. People in power are notorious, I believe, in terms of taking advantage of our weaknesses in relation to our environments. Now, we've developed 3 tools, and I want to teach you a little bit about them here today, that track environmental conditions. We've developed 3 tools that track the signature of trading life in these environmental conditions. Okay? When we see this signature, we're tracking environmental conditions. You already have the flux. The flux is doing this. But I want you to see the source code of the flux and perhaps a few other things that are indicative of that. The daily cycle marker tool tracks an environmental cycle. A lot of people ask, what is the source of the daily cycle marker code? It is an external indicator, meaning it is tracking data and cycles from an outside source above the Earth, above our planet. This particular indicator covers 4 phases of a cycle. And I'm going to add the 2 that I had off back on. If you'll bear with me just 1 second. So in relation to our cycles, I'm going to draw this signature again. And so we have these 4 phases that are continually moving through this cycle. We have 0 degrees, phase 1. We have 90 degrees, phase 2. We have 270 degrees, phase 3. We have 360 degrees, phase 4. And then these cycles repeat, just like a sine wave. Everywhere there's a phase 4, it goes back into a phase 1. And then we come into the next phase 1. And then we come into the next phase 1. So it's always coming back around. The record is always spinning back to the other side of the album. And then the same thing could be said for the other phases, these other energy cycles that the software is tracking. You have a phase 2, you have another phase 2, you have another phase 2. And pretty soon, in 1 day, 15 hours, you have another phase 2. we can track, once we understand the source of the energy cycle, when the next phase is coming. Similarly, for the red side of things, you can see what happens at the phase 4s, what kind of behavior takes place. So, Carol, which of these phases is most like a sunspot solar peak high? David, which of these cycles is most like a sunspot solar peak high? Which colors? How about we start with that? The red ones, exactly. Because in relation to what we were just looking at, these peaks are generally in line with or very early precede a sell-off. And so we're seeing evidence of that in this energy cycle. We're seeing that these peaks are crescendos of what? Human anxiety. And you see where these highs are kicking in? These are times when people lose their cookies. And then Chris Foster, you had said earlier, are the dips, are the valleys where good things happen. Do you start to notice where these cycles are times where people feel what? They feel elated. They feel happy. Honey, maybe we should take some of that bonus money and put it into the 401k. Yes, David. So this is one of the first cycles that we can track on a daily chart. And that's not a mega chart with decades in between it. So we're breaking this down into smaller and smaller pieces, where the earlier section was this sort of multi-year tracking. We're looking now intraday and end of day and finding there are smaller cycles in nature that affect human behavior. And this is just an example of one. It's not just the E-mini S&P that this works with, too. It also works with other markets like the Euro USD. It also works with things like bonds. And there are fairly predictable things that happen as we enter into the new phases of the energy cycle that we're tracking. It also works with stocks. This is a company called Chesapeake Energy. And we see that there's a very strong correlation between, again, those red peaks and those green bottoms. People tend to feel elated at the bottom of the cycle when their environmental conditions change. Then they start to go the other way. Okay, so here's an example of that same cycle with Apple. So Carol, if we look at the price of Apple stocks, look what happens at the phase 1s and the phase 2s. If you had bought Apple at the close of the phase 2 and held it to the close of the phase 4, there's a $6 move. There's a $1.50 move. There's a $2.50 move. If you had bought at the close of the phase 1 and sold at the phase 3, and we're currently up $2.7 in Apple. So energy cycle number 1 tracks a 90-degree phase cycle. Think of it like a circle. The circle has 4 points: 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 270. I'm sorry, 0, 90, 270, 360. And so this would be a phase 1, this would be a phase 2, this would be a phase 3, this would be a phase 4. The second indication, the second energy cycle that we were able to discover and locate and track was the Flux Orion. The Flux Orion is a 180-degree cycle, and it also tracks a cause-effect environmental relationship. Okay, so it's a lot easier to see the signals when there are fewer of them. Here's Apple again. I'm going to go back and start where we were at the E-mini S&P. That's what most of you are looking at. And this is a 180-degree cycle. There are two phases. There's some missing signals on my chart. I'm just going to draw one in where I know that it is. We're working on finding out how to handle holidays with this chart. And are they all here? Yeah, they're all here now. So in this chart, we have a 180-degree environmental energy system, phase system. So in this example, we're constantly moving between one extreme and another extreme. And the red dots are one phase of the energy cycle, Carol, and the green dots are the other phase of the energy cycle. And we're constantly swinging like a pendulum back and forth between the two, and the result is also a sine wave. So these signals are literally coming from space, from outside of the Earth as we know it. And so in that sense, when we identify the cycle, when we identify the energy phases, we can predict when the next cycles are coming. And so the next red dot, for example, is going to occur in 9 days, 15 hours, 10 minutes, and 46 seconds. The next green dot in this chart is going to occur in 22 days, 15 minutes, 15 hours, 10 minutes, and 35 seconds. And then the next red dot is 37 days, 15 hours, 10 minutes, and 28 seconds after that. And so we have this haunting pictorial of price. And Carol, do you see what starts to happen at those cycles? There's also a dot at January 4th that doesn't plot with this indicator for some reason, but it's there. If I take the moving average off, when Rockefeller said billionaires trade astrology, not millionaires, this is astrology. This is what he was referring to. And so, Carol, along the same lines of everything we were just talking about, when you see these red dots, they indicate bad environmental conditions, the room getting cold. And David, when you see these green dots, these are electromagnetic forces, gravitational field, electric field, magnetic field derived, which indicate the room is starting to warm up. And what's fabulous is that we can apply this to a whole consortium of stocks and markets. We can put this, for example, on things like crude futures, which are extremely unpredictable at first, right? But when you start to look at them in detail with this energy cycle on top, you start to realize, whoa, there's way more to this. When you start to go back and look at bonds, again, there's a correlation there that you sort of can't ignore, right, David? And you begin to understand, I think we understand better what this guy was saying right here. After exhaustive researches and investigations of the known sciences, I discovered the law of vibration enabled me to accurately determine the exact points to which stocks and commodities should rise and fall within a given time. The working out of this law determines the cause and predicts the effect. Determines the cause, predicts the effect. Cause, effect. And those last two charts, we definitely have a cause-effect relationship. Ron and I have identified the cause, and then we can predict when the next events are coming and allow people to start to chime in on, hey, this is a time where people are going to start feeling happy. This is a time where people are going to start feeling elated. This is a time where people will feel a little more apt to purchase. Reminds me of that war song, right? I think it's that war song. Yeah, here it is. Happy days are here again.
So let's sing the song.
Come on, get happy.
Happy days are here again.
So as humans, we're constantly vacillating between fear and greed, happiness and paranoia. Now, I want to show you everybody with me so far? People in power take advantage of our weaknesses in relation to our environments. I want to show you a tool, and I'm going to tell you exactly what the energy cycle is. I had a really crazy idea, and I shared that idea with Ron. He's very supportive, but a lot of times he'll kind of direct me to very practical means or applications sometimes when I'm a little nuts. And so it occurred to me, Gary, that there were these TV shows called Ghost Hunters. Anybody ever see these television shows? They're pretty popular. The Ghost Hunters. And what does that have to do with trading? Well, they would use these devices called EMF detectors. They would use devices called EMF detectors. The theory being that if a ghost was in the room, the electromagnetic field would change. And I would watch these stupid shows, and the dumb meter would go off, and a girl would say, "Ah, something touched me." The more practical application was for people wanting to test electromagnetic fields around their house. Make sure their kids weren't going to get cancer from the local poles. And so I started the search on Amazon for the most sensitive one that I could find. Because, David, it appeared at that point in our developmental cycle that there was this really strong correlation between environmental conditions and human psychology. And if the banks were going to take advantage of that, I was going to take advantage of that. And so I determined that we were going to buy one of these sensors, and we were going to crawl up to the top of the Chicago towers surrounding the exchange, and we were going to track the electric field and the magnetic field in real time. Now, you think that's crazy. There's a wonderful book by WD Gann, Tunnels in the Air, Tunnel Through the Air. If you have not read the book, I strongly advise you to read the book. Many people theorize that Gann left the secrets to his theories in this fictional work that he wrote. And in the book, he describes a machine that he built that allowed him to read the minds and track the behaviors of the banks who were trying to derail his trading career down the road. And his secretary monitored the machine in the back room that was measuring when they were going to come after him. And that was my idea for the EMF detector. But then I realized something. We already had EMF detectors. And I didn't have to go anywhere to get them. They were already out there. And so, I want to introduce you to two satellites. This is the NOAA GOES 13 satellite. Your tax dollars hard at work. There's the 13, and then there's the 15. And guess what their purpose in life is, Gary? Guess what they measure? They measure electric fields, and they measure the Earth's magnetic fields. So Ron and I spent the better part of a year working with programmers who found the data. The data is uploaded to a NOAA server, and then that NOAA server sends the information to another server that we found and we've been stripping data from. And Carol, guess what that is? That's data from space. Intraday space weather data. More specifically, the Earth's magnetic field. A very expensive EMF detector. And Derek, what I theorized was that if we found cycles on yearly charts that were related to the sun, if we found cycles on daily charts that were related to minor energy cycles, then we should find cycles intraday. The trade signals you guys trade, right? Does that make sense, Gary? There should be evidence of these cycles intraday. Little variations. And so we instructed the programmers to build us a tool. And just like the flux histograms, we told them to do very specific things. We said, Gary, when the magnetic field hits a high and starts to drop away, we want to put a red dot on the bars. So everywhere there's a high, we put a red dot, just like our flux histograms. And then everywhere there's a low, guess what we're going to put on the bar when it forms? We're going to put a green dot. Because just like our solar cycles, remember this? I wanted to see, Carol, if we could track fear and greed at micro levels. Were people responding to very small changes in their environmental conditions over the course of the day? How sensitive is our nervous system? How sensitive is our brain to environmental conditions? It's a pretty valid theory, right? So I want to show you the results of that experiment. And this is an indicator available for purchase if you want it. Gary, what tends to happen at magnetic field highs? Carol, what tends to happen at magnetic field lows? Well, some pretty amazing stuff. Remember what I said happens at a magnetic field high, when the Earth's magnetic field can't go any higher and starts to subside. And remember what I said we should see when the Earth's magnetic field starts to increase. And so as we stretch these signals out and start to pull it back, Derek, does there seem to be some compelling evidence for the theory? Let's go ahead and add more days to the data. There appears to be an intraday cycle occurring. Now we're looking at 30-minute signals because this is easier for us to see. Okay, but as far back as we can go, David, should those cycles be where they're at relative to price? Should that correlation exist the way that it does? It's haunting. To me, it's haunting. And the last place I saw cycles like this was on a flux histogram chart. And that's when I realized that we had come as close as we had ever come to the source code of the flux. Can everyone see this gold chart? Does that not look hauntingly similar to the electromagnetic field chart? What tends to happen at red dots in an uptrend in a flux chart, Derek? Consolidation. What tends to happen at green dots in an uptrend? Prices go up. Banks take advantage of environmental changes that affect trader judgment. Where it gets really scary, is down at the lower ends of the analysis. 30-minute charts are fine. Can you guys see this chart okay? This is a 5-minute chart of the E-mini S&P. You want to know something really strange? Remember the patterns that I teach you in the webinars? The higher high green dot pattern? There it is on a 5-minute E-mini S&P chart. There's a high Carol at 2:15 a.m. on a 5-minute magnetic field chart. Let's go ahead and change this over to crude. This is a 3-minute crude futures chart. And these are 3-minute satellite signals measuring the environmental conditions that we trade in and around. This is the room getting cold, the room getting hot. Derek, do you see any correlations between the two? So far this morning. As we go back in time, here's yesterday, for example. What does that chart look like? What do these charts look like that we've seen in the past? They look a lot like our flux histograms, don't they? No, they're measuring it, Carol. Carol says, are the satellites putting out the EMF? No, they're measuring it. So Carol, there are all of these forces that are constantly bombarding our planet. The Earth is a living, breathing, pulsing, oscillating environment. And so we're exposed to more or less radiation as things progress. And when our bodies encounter that, and again, I realize how stupidly crazy this sounds, but the evidence bears out the theory. When we experience bad environmental conditions, Dave, I don't want to go that far today, but I agree with you. I do agree with you. When we experience those bad environmental conditions, banks push the markets because they know. Well, Carol, you're saying what David is saying. Do the markets get pushed? Can the banks or can governments actually influence human behavior? Okay, that's a valid question. I'm dancing around it, so let's just address it. Can the banks manipulate environmental conditions to make people feel a certain way, what you would call a mind control device? In theory, if you control magnetic field variations, you control market sentiment, and you control how people feel and behave about the market. Right? If you control the environmental conditions that make people nuts and crazy, you control when people feel good and when people feel not so good. So there's definitely something to explore there. It's hard to prove. So right here, it's sort of easy to stop. But what I want to call to your attention is this. In every webinar that I have, in every webinar that I teach, I give out something called a guide to the histograms. You guys remember that guide? I'll go ahead and put a link to it if you don't have it already, but I'm pretty sure most of you already have it. So let's go ahead and copy the link, and I'll share it out into the room here today. And so when you open that, there are these wonderful patterns that I've taught you that we've learned work really well in the flux. And one of those patterns, the very last one, is called a pattern 5. Carol, it's a higher high green dot. Remember this one? Derek, remember this one? It's when we move into a higher high and we have a buying pressure signal, the market tends to exhaust. And we see this on flux charts all the time. We see it on 1-minute charts, 10-minute charts, hour charts. We even see it on the daily charts that we just looked at. The 2 energy cycles, the flux daily cycle markers and the flux Orion. Well, Derek, what the hell is it doing on a magnetic field chart? What the hell is a pattern 5 histogram signal doing on a magnetic field chart? I want you to think about that. How did it get there? What is this that we look at on the E-mini S&P 5-minute chart, 3-minute chart, CL 1-minute chart? What is that doing here? Unless, is this the source code of the flux histograms? Is this the source code? Have we found the cause that predicts the effect? Have we found the cause that predicts the effect? It's an interesting question. It's as close as I've ever come. If I was ever remembered for anything after my death in trading, this would be the thing I hope they would posthumously award me something for. Because so far as I know, there's no one else tracking this. Now, let me tell you what I'm looking at here. There is an actual practical application to this study. Gary, these cycles appear to occur in regularity, right? There appear to be a somewhat predictable cycle about them. If you just connect their highs, you'll see there are valleys and there are mountaintops. And there's that signal, that fingerprint of life occurring again. Well, what I'd like you to key in on is this. Up top, I want you to see where those peaks are occurring. Okay, there's peaks, and then we're going to track the valleys. So I'll change the color, and then we'll track the valley. And I want you moving forward to be sensitive. Now that we know the source, I want you to be sensitive to these cycles. Because you already know how to trade the signals intraday using the flux. I want you to look at the source code and see how much time you have between the major cycles. So Gary, we've identified the major cycles here, right? Can everyone see there's a regularity of sorts to it? The lines are almost evenly spaced. 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 5 hours on, 5 hours off. There's almost like a ping pong game taking place. Okay? And so what I'd like you to do is sort of track what happens between the cycles. Most of the time. And you'll see that there are inversions just like in the other charts. What do I mean by that? We have higher high green dots. We have pattern 4 lower low red dots inside of that landscape. And so, looking at the current E-mini S&P cycle, Gary, when do you think the next low will be put in the E-mini S&P? Well, track the spacing of the magnetic field lines. What does the gap appear to be? Let's go here and we'll kind of walk our way through. Here, 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 here. There's the spacing, right? So on average, I'm going to take from green to red. Gary, I'm going to draw a block. Ready? Green to red, green to red, green to red, green to red. And so, Carol, I'm going to take those blocks and I'm going to put them over here now. Watch. Ready? Here, 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 and here. Can everybody see what I've done? I've lined up those blocks from the past. Okay, which means the low, in all likelihood, is earliest here, here, maybe as late as here. before what happens down below. Before we have, well, you get the point. Everybody see where we're going with that? But we've identified the cause, and we're predicting the effect. And we already know that there's a signal called a back-to-back inversion that we're tracking. Go ahead and look in the other guidebook that I gave you. If you don't have it, I'll get you a copy of that as well. I'll put a link of the book in the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube. And in our Michael's setup book, there's a pattern on page 13 called a back-to-back inversion. We're almost there. There it is. Everybody see that pattern right there? When we have a higher high green dot, it will usually fall to the next selling pressure. Yes, David, I have. And that's not something I can go too deeply into this morning. The markets are getting ready to open and I don't want to go too deep today. I just wanted this to be an introduction. We see this pattern all the time on intraday charts using Flux predictive software for Ninjatrader. Look at what's taking place right here. You see the correlation? Okay. And in the same ways that we track highs and lows using daily cycle marker lines, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add, how do I do that? Numbers of historical, max historical, there we go. Let's put 20 and 20. We used to have and still have daily cycle marker lines on the daily cycle marker chart. Watch what happens when we put magnetic field lines on the chart. Can everyone see where the market has been stopping and hitting? If not, let me help you see it. The closing prices of the magnetic field line measurements become support and resistance in the market. Okay. Now, let me show you how real that is. I'm going to do it one more time. I'm just going to put a horizontal line on every one of these magnetic field lines. If you'll indulge me here just 1 second, I want to make sure I get it right. And then I want you to see what happens intraday. Okay, so I have the lines on the chart. I'm stripping away the indicator, and Gary, now I'm going to go to a 5-minute chart. I'm going to go to a 1-minute chart. Are the markets bouncing at these levels, people? Yeah. It's kind of crazy how that all works out. So you can use this tool to check support and resistance levels in the markets that you're trading. So I'm expecting lower moves now into the close of the day here today, but we'll be tracking the intraday cycles with you in the live room here as soon as I close out this discussion. Today, for example, on the E-mini S&P on a 30-minute chart, we see on the Flux histogram that there's a potential for selling pressure at 10 a.m. Right now, the market is moving into a lower low as we come into 10 a.m. When the market moves into a lower low at a selling pressure prediction time, we historically see this pattern right here. A pattern where the market tends to stop, reverse, and go the other way. And so when we see that pattern in real life, it tends to play out like this. So what I would like you to remember moving forward, what are these dots symbolic of? What are they truly representative of? Is it just some fluke, crazy Ninjatrader indicator? Or is there something more going on here? And what I'd like you to be sensitive to, what I'd like you to keep in mind moving forward, is in fact that these are subtle, sensitive shifts in our environmental conditions that banks are taking advantage of and exploiting for personal gain on the tier of billion and trillionaires, if there is such a thing. They wait for when you feel pretty crappy, and then they pour lemon juice into your wounds and get you to sell off your positions so they can buy at a wholesale price. We're tracking human behavior. We're tracking human sentiment with these Flux intraday signals. One last thing, be sensitive to your moods. If you want to track, keep a journal, keep a diary. Those of you that are a little more advanced in these areas, track your mood or your sentiment in a journal or a diary on a calendar. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a pretty crappy day, 10 being an amazing, wish I could have a day like this every day. And then I want you to go back and plot that on a chart. Put green dots underneath the days of the chart you're tracking where you felt really good. Put red dots on the chart on the days you felt really crappy. I had the worst day that I could remember in recent history yesterday. It was a horrible day. It was an absolutely horrible day. And sure enough, I came back and I saw the markets had fallen. And I thought, wow. Are they doing it? Are they taking advantage of it? Did they know that I would feel this way? And then in your personal life, it can even extend to your relationships. As you're coming into these selling pressure, paranoid, bad feeling phases, give yourself some space. Give your spouse and your kids and your coworkers some space to process and work through those sentiments, those feelings. It's just a natural part of life. It's who we are as humans. It's what we're hardwired to experience, and those intuitions served us for many thousands of years. People in the past were very sensitive to it. King Solomon of Old Testament fame said, everything that has happened under the sun, everything that has happened will happen again. There is nothing new under the sun. And so these phases, these cycles, these shifts in environmental conditions, they've been happening for millennia. People take advantage of it. They go to war when they come. They build cities and civilizations when they're over. And whether or not they're manipulating us to do those things or we're just doing it naturally is irrelevant. You now know how to track it for both your personal life and for your trading life. Okay? Any other questions about this little mini class here? If not, I'll hit the stop button and we'll start heading right into the intraday analysis and looking for trading signals here in the Flux room. Okay.